Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic video. I hope everyone's doing good. It is Monday at 10:36. So, yeah, I want to thank everyone for some of the new subscribers that have been coming on board. Had a few more come in this weekend. It's great. I love that there are other fellow fellow film fanatics and people that love these weird movies that are out there. It's cool running into people online at least who have a shared enthusiasm for these pretty obscure films. Again, like I always say, I try to cover a variety of different things, but my love, my passion for films always kind of gravitates towards the more obscure, the exploitation world. I just can't get enough of them. They're just so fun. It's one of those things where I was over my folks' house. I have my uncle is in town. He's up here visiting, and we had a little bit of a dinner thing last night. And I went over to their house for a little bit, and we had some dinner, and we watched this new television show that just came out with Bob Odenkirk. I can't even remember the name of it, but I love Bob Odenkirk. He's kind of one of my favorite comedians. He originally got his start with David Cross in Mr. Show, Bob and David, which is probably, again, it's hard to always say or pinpoint like your favorite, but I kind of feel that Mr. Show with Bob and David is like my favorite kind of sitcom. Well, not I wouldn't know. It's definitely not a sitcom, but my favorite sketch comedy show of all time. Super funny, super satirical. It's definitely a satire. It's super dark. It covers so many different topics, in the social, kind of in our social environment. Just amazing. But David Cross, who has become a real popular actor and as well as a comedian, and also Bob Odenkirk, they both got their start in with this TV show, and now they've become really popular in various TV shows. Better Call Saul was a show that was really huge for Bob Odenkirk. He's done full-length feature movies. David Cross was also had a huge break after this show that he did or after Mr. Show, Bob and David. He's gone on to become a huge star. But we watched this new series that was, I guess, premiering last night at on AMC, I believe it was, with Bob Odenkirk. And I love Bob Odenkirk, but I don't know, I didn't really like it, and I thought it was cool. It was centered on this. He plays a writer at a college, at you know a college that's almost like a community college, but and basically it's very, very cynical. It's pretty dark, but it's very much playing on the whole thing of political correctness, like where we are right now. Where and the whole idea of what cancel culture is, and how people are really, really sensitive about everything, and then people get offended by everything. And I get it, and it was cool, and I get that it's covering these issues that are kind of a part of our culture. But it was, for me, and I've talked about it before, mostly around documentaries, movies or TV shows that have something to say. Like they have, it's essentially a critique for on our culture and kind of where we are, and and I 99% of the time I agree with the way it's explored. And I tend to, well, I consider myself to be, on the progressive side of things, so on kind of in the more the so-called liberal side of things. I try to feel, or I try to be pretty open-minded when it comes to discussions on various things. But I tend to be on a little bit more on the left, of issues, and but I still feel that there's been a trend of where you have to agree, or things are so. I feel like in movies and films now that deal with issues that are like considered social issues, they're very heavy-handed, and it kind of becomes this thing of where I feel like I'm being preached to, and that as a viewer I kind of need to agree with their worldview as opposed to like making up my own mind, and I just feel like this new TV show that I watched last night was another example of that. I agree that this culture right now is really, as a whole, is really fragmented, and there's this obsession with fear, and then there's also this obsession around political correctness, and that the idea that people are offended by everything, and that everybody really has to be careful what they say and how they present themselves. And I get all of that, but I thought that the show was so heavy-handed with kind of making. I got the sense it was making trying to get me that I needed to agree with how things are, and how things are just essentially fucked up, and that as opposed to like throwing out these ideas and exploring these ideas without having to be preached to. And I don't know, and I feel like there's a trend around all of those things. It was too heavy-handed, and I checked out. And that's one of the reasons that I love the world of exploitation. And it's not because I want to like bury my head in the sand or be in this constant state of denial, because I think I have a pretty good sense on what our reality is to a degree, or at least what we're conditioned to believe what our reality is. But I think there's a way that, as a director, or these creative forces that direct movies and TV shows, can explore those ideas, but not where it's so heavy-handed and where I feel like I'm forced to go along and to agree with their views. Uh, and I felt like this show that I just watched was very much an example of that. And there's another movie that came out which I thought was a good movie in a lot of ways, and it really, and again, it was the same case, same situation of where I felt I agree pretty much with everything that the filmmakers have to say, and on the commentary. And that's a movie that came out, I think it was last year, Leonardo DiCaprio, called Don't Look Up. And it's basically a movie. It's a comedy. It's kind of a black comedy, and it was released online. I don't know, it's like Hulu Plus or something. But it was a really huge movie, and it was on, and it was an a I don't know if it was Hulu Plus, but it was some online streaming platform company that created this movie. And it was called Don't Look Up. And the movie is basically a critique about the environment and politics, and also how the media plays into where we are as a culture, and also the elected officials that we have in office, and also about the state of how we are dealing with some real problems. And again, it's an example of, I agree with the basic premise of what that story is about, and where we are and how how we are dealing with, say, issues like the environment, climate change, all those things. And I tend to believe that we are, uh, handling that situation in probably the worst way possible. But that's my opinion. And but this film deals with that, and it's it's a drama, but it's a kind of a black comedy, and but to me it was the thing that I did not like about that film was that it was so heavy-handed, and I was made to feel that I need to agree with this political agenda that this film had. And it does have, but it's so overt and so heavy-handed that I feel like I'm just being bombarded with that commentary. And because of that, I can't get into the film, even though I completely, for the most part, agree with that stance or that view. And that's just how I am. And two movies that I covered recently that I feel deal with those same kind of issues in regards to, say, where we are as a culture, the military industrial complex, our domestic situation, our, how we how we interact and how we interact with other countries, our stance, the United States' stance in the world, as being a superpower. A movie that I felt dealt with a lot of those heavy-handed, or not heavy-handed, but serious subjects, and that they are social and political issues that do affect us every day. But a movie, I did a show on Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, and I thought that movie really, even though the exterior of that movie is so utterly ridiculous and hilarious and weird and strange, and the heart of it, it's dealing with a lot of serious issues. But I never feel, and again, it's that same thing where overall I feel completely aligned with kind of having that worldview of how things are. But I never feel like I never felt I never got that feeling from watching Attack of the Killer Tomatoes that it was ever kind of rubbing my face in it and getting me or persuading me to believe or to go along with a political agenda. It was first and foremost a totally entertaining film, but it never came across to me as heavy-handed and preachy, and that I felt like I was almost. It never felt like a propaganda film, as far as like dealing with those issues. It was still entertaining, but yet it had all these different viewpoints on those subjects I mentioned, and it just did a great job on a real, you know, it was just a great satire on kind of where we are as a culture and as a species, and it showed various viewpoints, but it did such an amazing job of never feeling. I never. Every time I watch that film, I never feel like, okay, this is quote unquote a progressive view on, how we carry ourselves as Americans, and you need to agree with this, and blah blah blah. It never felt that way, and it never feels that way to me. And I just think that that is a great example. And I know that, granted, the exploitation world is very, very different than, say, a movie like Don't Look Up, which is like essentially a big budget Hollywood movie, and also this TV show that I watch, which is like a big budget television show, and it's a new series that's coming. But that's kind of where I feel. That's kind of how I feel about how those things are kind of done, and I feel like that's an effective way or a non-effective way to go about talking about these things. and it just does such a brilliant job. And then another movie I just covered yesterday called The Stuff, another fabulous movie directed by Larry Cohen. Again, it tackles so many social issues, and especially it's a real heavy critique on consumerism in the American culture, and like a real heavy critique on corporations and how we're essentially run by corporations. But at the same time, it's never heavy-handed. It lays out various different views, but yet it's still entertaining, and I never feel like I'm being bombarded with like, no, you need to agree with this quote unquote liberal stance, you know. And I just feel like that's the way, at least from my perspective, that's the way something like that should be explored. Um, and so the minute that I'm watching something, I feel like, even if it's a good movie or I agree with the political stance on a certain issue, the minute I feel like I'm being told that I need to think a certain way, I check out. I'm done. But that's just me. So, and I kind of feel we're in a stage, or we're in a place when it comes to the world of entertainment where that's a thing now, and it's very, very overt and obvious. And I just feel like, you know, what happened to really good writing and really and just good a really good use of imagination. I think going back to, like I said, Bob Odenkirk and David Cross getting their start with the amazing show Mr. Show with Bob and David. That series that was on for about 3 years, a sketch. It was the best sketch comedy show I think around. That dealt with all of those same kinds of issues, but it did such a brilliant job of never being preachy about it or too heavy-handed, but yet it got its point across. But anyway, so yeah, and it's funny getting a little bit off topic. I had a friend recently get in touch with me, my great friend Erica Patrick, who I've mentioned her before in previous videos, and we are, we met quite a few years ago. I used to run this open mic, and I met her through that, and I was part of the house band at this open mic. And she would come to it, and she's a singer, and she would come and sit in, and she's a really super talented vocalist. And we started talking and getting to know each other at this open mic, and this was probably about 5 or 6 years ago. And we realized we had a real deep love of movies, especially at the time, all things Marvel. And Aaron and I struck up a really good friendship since then. And that, kind of Marvel movies and our love of that genre was the thing that kind of like brought us together. And we over the years since then we've become good friends, and we go to lots of movies and watch movies together and all those kinds of things. And a few years ago she got really burnt out, especially when Disney Plus and various other companies, it was mostly Disney Plus, where they kind of acquired the rights to Disney and to Marvel, and they started putting out all of these TV shows, and suddenly there was, you know, even more things in the Marvel universe that were coming out. Kind of, I felt like it was overwhelming, but she got totally fatigued, and now she can't even watch a Marvel movie now, and she changed her whole tune around those kinds of movies about, I don't know, a couple of years ago. And I was kind of bummed out. I was like, oh, but I'm a Marvel person. I like some DC, but Marvel for me has always been, you know, the best, and when it comes to comic book movies. And I was always kind of like trying to get her back into it and trying to be like, hey, come on, there's still some good movies coming out. And, we were both huge fans of the Avenger movies, particularly around Affinity War and Endgame. I just thought those movies were just, they're masterpieces. And shortly after that, you know, it was kind of like, as a viewer and as a fan, I was like, where is this going to go? Are they going to? It felt like there was real closure, but yet Marvel was still they still had the intent to really keep exploring and still putting out, and they were still intent on putting out movies every year or every couple of years based off of this or that, or they started getting into trying to introduce new characters and new plot lines. And I felt as a viewer it was not very successful. And there was like all of this inconsistency after a while. And now the last movie I saw in the theater, which was a Marvel movie, was the latest Quantumania, Ant Man. And I was so disappointed with that movie. I did a review on that film, and I like Paul. I love Paul Rudd, and I'm a pretty big fan of the first two Ant Man movies. I have the first one on Blu-ray, and I definitely enjoy those films. But I was really disappointed with it, and suddenly for me, I had this incredible amount of fatigue sit in around it, and I'm like, I can't do it anymore. I can't. I've reached a point as much of a comic book fan as I am, I'm just like I can't bring myself to go to another movie and see another superhero movie. I'm just burnt out because I've seen too many disappointing movies. There was well the latest Ant-Man movie. There was the Eternals that came out. There was a few other ones I can't even remember what they were because they're just like super mediocre at best. Ever since the Avengers series kind of came to a conclusion, I really loved the last one. I really loved was the last Spider-Man movie. I thought that movie was incredible, but ever since then, I've never really been into. I just thought they've been okay or not good at all, and very anticlimactic after following up such two incredible movies. And I've kind of arrived at that point of where I have no interest now in seeing any Marvel movies. It's really weird, and I'm burnt out. And I just wish they would do something different, or just not do it anymore, or do movies that are truly standout films. Like Thor Ragnarok, or the Batman with Robert Patterson, or like the first Deadpool, or Logan, the Wolverine spin-off movie, the Joker. Movies that are really exceptional and they're really special. They're they're truly like they're doing something for the most part really original. Not really the Joker. I've talked about the Joker because of it essentially ripping off the King of Comedy in every way possible. But anyway, I feel like that's the only way to go now. But that's not happening, and I don't see it happening or changing. I don't know. James Gunn, who's one of my favorite directors, has taken over the DC universe and now and has announced over the last couple of months that they're going to be releasing all of these new movies for the next 10 years. So I love his work. Guardians of the Galaxy, the Guardians of the Galaxy franchise, Slither, Super. I mean, so many great movies. He's such a fabulous director. And the last version of Suicide Squad, which is such an awesome movie, so underrated, so underappreciated. So I think that's promising, but at the same time, I don't really give a shit anymore. It's really weird. So she was asking me, Erin was asking me the other day about going to see some movies, and she got some free passes recently from a friend, And I love going to the movies. That's my, my favorite thing to do. And then when I looked up to see what's playing, it's like, I don't know, every other movie or every movie is a superhero movie. And I said to her, I don't have any interest in anything right now. I don't see anything that I'm excited about. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what happens. But it's weird. It's weird. It's like, and I feel like, you know, maybe the powers that be that run these studios will have maybe it'll be a wake up call and there'll be some kind of backlash and they'll maybe want to change the direction. But so again, I've been going back to the movies that I love, and that is the world of exploitation because to me it's always satisfying. It's the very definition of entertainment and escapism. And that brings me to this amazing movie here, Crash, 1977. This movie is such a crazy experience. I bought this. This is on the Full Moon label, which is a label that's pretty decent. I mean, I know I have a few titles from this company, but not a lot. They're okay. They seem to do most of the films that they do, or at least from what I gathered, they mostly cover horror movies, movies that are pretty decent. Nothing that I think is necessarily exceptional, but pretty decent. They seem to a lot of the movies that they've covered are films from the 80s, certain horror films that are pretty good. This is like one of the movies that I think that they put out. I don't know of them putting out a whole lot of like exploitation movies, and this is definitely one. And I think out of the Full Moon movies that I've seen quite a few. I think I own a couple. This is definitely my favorite release from Full Moon. I think that this movie, this was a new discovery. I bought this without I had never seen it before, and I bought it on a whim. It was really cheap, and I just was like, this movie just looks amazing. It's completely bonkers. Just the storyline itself. Came out in 1977, and it's basically centered on a crippled man's wife buys this black magic amulet, and it takes over this car. And the car essentially becomes possessed by this demon and goes on this rampage. And this movie has if you're a fan of action movies, but particularly around like action involving like car chase scenes, car crash scenes, this movie has some of the best scenes in those genres that I've ever seen. I mean, it's amazing, and it was so incredibly low budget, and it's like a combination of like a classic car crash movie mixed in with the occult or like a supernatural element. And it's funny, I was reading about this morning, and this movie came out the same year that The Car came out, which I did a show on, which is one of my favorite horror exploitation movies of all time. That movie, The Car, which stars James Brolin, that movie I grew up watching, and I love that movie. But this movie actually came out the same year, but this came out a few months before. And I believe that this movie was kind of eclipsed by The Car, because The Car essentially even though it's a super low budget movie, it was a total knockoff and ripoff of Jaws. And it really capitalized on its success, even though it's an exploitation movie. But that movie, from what I gather, really took the rug from underneath this movie. So that movie, The Car, had quite a bit more of a financial had quite a bit more financial success, whereas this one kind of fell by the wayside, from what I gather. But and I had never seen this movie, but I heard about it and I saw it in the store, and it's just amazing. I mean, it's such an entertaining movie. It's one of those great classic exploitation movies that, it's a I feel like it's a party movie. Like, this is a great movie to put on if you have some friends over and you're having some drinks or beers and you order pizza or whatever and you throw this bad boy in. It's so entertaining and it's so fun. And when you think about, you know, we'll say movies like, or franchises like, say, the Fast and the Furious, like those are huge movies and they're essentially car movies. But they have, like, the budgets are just monstrous. But this, and they're okay. But this, like, there's no budget whatsoever, and all of the stunt work, there's no CGI. They're doing all of this stuff in camera, and they're really, like, risking their lives. When you see some of the stunt work in this film, particularly around the chase scenes and the actual car crashes, it's pretty unbelievable how there's so much destruction in this movie, and how dangerous, these stuntmen were putting them in such. They were putting themselves in such, a dangerous situation because there was no reliance on CGI or. But it just adds so much to the kind of the ferocity of this movie. And again, the whole occult element with the wife who has this amulet that is part of this, that conjures up this demon, and this demon takes over this car and goes on this rampage. It's hilarious, but it's amazing. It's amazing at the same time. It's super bizarre, but it's completely entertaining. I just recommended this to a buddy of mine, and I know he bought it, who is really, really into, well, he's really into cars, but he's really into, car movies. And I had just recommended this movie to him, and I know he bought it. And I haven't heard back yet from him if he's watched it, but I'm excited to see what he thinks. Because I think, as far as, you know, as a genre, it's definitely an exploitation movie, but as a car chase movie, or an action movie driven around car wrecks and things like that, this is one of the best. Like, it's just so like over the top and completely insane. Charles Band was the director of this film. And he was a pretty prolific director for quite a few years. He was responsible for the Puppet Master movies, which is wild. 1989. I mean, those are iconic movies. Evil Bong in 2006, which is, came out not all that long ago. Trancers, 1984. The Gingerbread Man in 2003. Demonic Toys in 92. Gingerbread Man vs. the Evil Bong, 2013. Um, Trancers 2 in 91. Puppet Master. I mean, he's done quite a few movies. He was responsible for directing and writing a bunch of the Puppet Master movies, which is an awesome franchise. I'm a huge fan of those films, particularly like the first couple of those. Those are classic, like 80s. Doll Man, he also directed. Puppet Master 4. There's like 5 or 6 of them, and he was responsible for all of those films. He also was responsible for the Ghoulies, which is amazing. That's an awesome horror exploitation movie from 1985. That's a killer movie. That's one I want to eventually get. Head of the Family in 96. The Evil Clergyman in 88. Parasite in 82. Yeah. Hideous in 97. Blood Dolls in 99. I mean, he's done a whole shit ton of horror exploitation movies. Ghoulies 2, he also directed 88. Dolls in 87. He was also involved with Reanimator, which is, one of the greatest horror movies ever. I did a big show on that. But Charles Band, he was the director of this film. super prolific director, and he's still like really active today. And when you think that this movie came out in 1977, is just nuts. That's just crazy. How many movies he was, that he has under his career, and definitely all under the umbrella of exploitation. But just fabulous, fabulous stuff. I I don't believe I have any of his other films on Blu-ray yet or DVD, but that will definitely happen. But he's most well known as being a producer and director, and he's worked mostly in the horror comedy world. You know, where I named most most of his films. Those are most of his films, and highly prolific. One of his he actually started too, which I didn't realize. He actually started Full Moon Productions and also Empire International Pictures. So not only is he a director, producer, and writer, but he also like runs his own companies. And Full Moon is the company that put this out. Pretty wild. I didn't realize that. But tremendous, tremendous, tremendous legacy. Really, when you think of all of the films he's been involved in, and some of the films that are very popular. I think one of the biggest franchises is, I mean, the Puppet Master films are very very popular, and it's a great franchise. I think I haven't seen those films in a long time, but I remember seeing one that came out fairly recently, and it was probably like the sixth or seventh one in the franchise, and it was actually pretty good. And so there's like a ton of movies just alone in that franchise, and so he pretty much created that, and that's a really popular franchise. And also the Ghoulies. I feel like the Ghoulies is also a real popular film and franchise. There's like three or four movies in that franchise. The first one's just such a classic. That's a movie I'd love to get also, as well as the Puppet Master films. But but I think overall, and again, there's quite a few of his films I haven't seen, but there's a lot of those I did see. Especially the ones in the early '80s. I haven't seen a lot of his newer films, but this is probably my favorite. Right behind the Puppet Master films. Uh, just such an awesome movie, and I highly recommend it. I believe this is like one of his first films, and it might be his first like full length feature. I mean, I think he was like 18 when he directed this Crash. So damn good. I highly recommend this movie. This edition of this film on Blu-ray is really really awesome. There's the transfer is great. It's all taken from the original film negative. It's all remastered, so the quality is pretty unbelievable. And there's some really great special features on here. There's the commentary track is really interesting. I'm not one to always check out commentary tracks. They are really great and informative, but I did check out the one on here, and it is really great because there's a full length interview or talk or discussion with Charles Band, and he goes into such detail. And it was done fairly recently, and he really goes into such detail about how he made this film, and it's really eye opening and super super cool. But yeah, you can't. This is a classic in the world of exploitation, horror exploitation. Crash, 1977. Do yourself a favor if you haven't seen this movie. This movie is, like I said, one of the definitive movies that if you're throwing a party with some friends, pop this bad boy in. You won't be disappointed. So, we will see you next time. Peace.